Hi, and welcome to CryptoBiography. I'm your host, Brandon Starr, and this is episode 183, and it's a start of a new story called A Stranger in Goldenlode. And here we go. Welcome to Goldenlode. Sam Lockhart didn't stop drinking from his mug, but he did glance over at the door. The saloon, which doubled as the greeting room for the largest inn in Goldenlode, was open and reasonably clean. The gravelly voice welcoming the stranger was that of Tom Printon, owner of the Big Nugget Saloon and Inn. Sam himself was contracted by the First Western Bank to keep problems moving along out of Goldenlode when they came through. Some folk coming to Goldenlode were miners, hoping to cash in on a gold rush that had long since dwindled to a trickle. Others hoped to work for one of the three still profitable mining companies, all of which deposited large amounts with First Western. All three mines knew of his arrangement with First Western and approved, even helped. And still other strangers hoped to sell goods or services, preferably at a steep markup to everyone else. The gouging had mostly stopped with the end of the gold rush, but not entirely. Sam looked at the stranger. He was unlike anyone he had seen here in town before. The dusk behind him highlighted his straight blonde hair, so light that it could almost be called white. His face was pale with just a hint of color that suggested the man was not, in fact, an albino. Though his white hair brought to mind the idea of age, the man's face couldn't be more than 30 or 35. The man went to Tom and spoke in a voice that did not carry. Fortunately, he'd been in town long enough to know Tom's disposition by sight. The man was asking for a room, and Tom would prepare one. But, interestingly to Sam, Tom's smile was forced in a way he had never seen on the genial man's face. Tom rang a bell, and Johnny, the assistant, came. The white-haired man said a few things to Johnny, who nodded and ran out the door, presumably to take care of the man's horse and possibly wagon. Come to think of it, Sam said to himself, definitely a wagon. Even the youngest children tan dark out here, even though it's getting colder in the September nights. That man, even with clothing, couldn't help but get darker than he is without a wagon. Perhaps he has someone driving for him, even? He decided to follow Johnny out the door. Put his beer down, but didn't pay. He wasn't planning on leaving yet. Johnny wasn't far. There was a little spot to the side of the Big Nugget that was a good spot for someone with a wagon to stop, and sure enough, Johnny was leading some horses with a wagon into the back, where he could release the horses and feed and water, and if the man paid for it, groom them. They looked like they'd spent the day on the trail, though not too hard driven. They were two horses, both black with irregular white blazes traveling down their face. There were no other people, either on the wagon or who might have already jumped off. Sam checked, but all the people visible on the street were known to him. Sam followed Johnny and the wagon to the back of the inn. The wagon looked very sturdy and drew Sam's attention more than the horses. It was made of some extremely dark wood, heavily built, with a very shady area for the driver. It was different from any other wagon Sam had ever seen, but he wasn't quite sure exactly what it was that made it seem so. He looked in the back. There were some boxes tied down, but no people. Apparently the pale man was alone, unless he had dropped people off before coming to the Big Nugget. Johnny finished with the horses and took a small trunk from the wagon, which he had apparently been tasked with bringing to the owner's room. He watched Johnny lug the trunk around the corner to the back door. He noticed there was a rat near the back wheel of the wagon. May have to mention that to Tom, he thought. He didn't see any other people, so apparently the pale man was in fact doing his own driving. How he stayed so pale when he must have gone for many days was beyond him. If he wrapped himself up, it would be terribly warm, even if the days were slowly starting to approach autumn. It was time to introduce himself. He went back to the front door and opened it. The pale man was at a table by himself, a pot of tea in front of him. He walked over, making sure to do it at a slow, even leisurely pace. The man had noticed him even before he started moving and was watching him as he approached. "Hello," Sam said when he was a couple of paces away. "Name's Sam Lockhart. The bank, First Western, pays me to make sure that people who are new in town aren't going to make trouble." The man simply looked at him coolly without saying a word. I make it my business, therefore, to meet everyone who comes through, or who comes to stay. Who are you, sir, and what is your business in Goldenlode? The man was silent a moment, then apparently decided to answer him. His voice was clear but soft. I am Richard Dunning. I am an undertaker by trade. I am making my way west, and I will stop when I find a town where my services are needed. You seem like a man who knows this place. I understand that the gold rush may be past its peak, yet people still flock here. Can you tell me why? Sam decided to tell him. Small claims were never great, and they dried up, he said. But the big 3 mines are all still moneymakers. Everything else in the town revolves around them. Richard nodded. He took a sip from his teacup. And do you have an undertaker? We do. John Mannard. He's been here for 15 years, when the mines were just opening up. Business isn't great, though. He also makes the caskets, and because he isn't kept busy enough, does other woodworking as well. Well, it sounds like you're all set then. Though I'll likely drop in on Mr. Mannard as a courtesy, exchange professional tips and so on. Who knows, perhaps he's looking to retire. Sam shrugged. I wouldn't know. John's not all that old, though. Any other advice for someone new to town, Mr. Lockhart? Since you're a man with a profession, I doubt we'll have any trouble, Mr. Dunning. Enjoy your stay, however long that is. Thank you. Mr. Dunning gave a slight raise of his teacup as though making a toast, and drank the rest of his tea. He rose and nodded at Sam. It's been a long journey of many days, and I'm looking forward to a real bed, if you'll excuse me. Sam just gave a small nod. Richard Dunning went to Tom and settled up and got his room key. Then he went up the stairs. Sam went back to his beer. Richard Dunning was perfectly polite, clearly had a good profession which would keep him out of trouble, and had answered his questions. So why couldn't he shake the feeling that something wasn't right? Was he reacting to the man's profession and its connection with death? Everyone he knew was always been a bit leery about the town's undertaker, John Mannard, despite him being a man of genteel disposition and the finest qualities. But Sam didn't count himself among them, and he was not superstitious, so why was Richard Dunning any different? His thoughts were interrupted when a man came into the saloon. Sam knew him. Gabriel Ortham, though people called him Gabe. Young, early 20s. He used to work in the Hathram mine, one of the 3 mines around Goldenlode, but he injured his foot in an accident and walked with a limp. He did small jobs of any kind he could to make money. One of the things he did was to bring information to Sam of the kinds he knew he'd appreciate, any word of new people in town, or any skullduggery he'd caught wind of. Gabe walked right up to Sam. Hey, Sam, someone new's in town, he said. I'm afraid I've already met the man, Sam said. Had a short chat with him. White hair, came in a dark wagon. Gabe looked a little crestfallen. Yeah, that's the one, he said. I saw him at the bank a while ago, talking with the manager. You were in the bank? No, Gabe said, looking a little embarrassed. I saw him coming into town and knew you'd have an interest and followed. He stopped by the bank. I watched through the window. Could you tell what they were up to? No, Gabe said. They didn't exchange money or anything, and I couldn't hear them at all. The window was closed. Anything else? 2 black horses harnessed to a rather solid-looking dark wagon, covered very well. He had little curtains. I could hardly see more than his hands when he was driving the wagon, and those were gloved. Sam just looked at him to see if there was more. That's it. Thanks, Gabe. He took out a $50 and gave it to him. So you know, the man's name is Richard Dunning, and he's an undertaker by trade, so he says. He may be ferreting around, trying to see if this is a good place to put down stakes. If you can get more information, I'd be interested. Thanks, Sam. He watched Gabe leave. He knew Gabe would be disappointed. Sam would have paid at least $1 if he'd brought truly fresh news. But he also knew Gabe would now be on the lookout for more information on Dunning. He now had extra eyes out. And that's the end of the first part of the story. Hope you're enjoying it. And Obviously, we'll be continuing this next week. A little bit of a change of pace, from some. Most of the other stories that I've been doing recently have been set more in modern times. So it's kind of fun to do like an old Westy story. We've done one before. It's been a while. If you have any comments or questions about this episode or previous episodes, cryptobiography@gmail.com, or hit us up on Facebook or Twitter. And thanks for listening. Copyright 2020, CryptoBiography LLC, all rights reserved. Characters and events are fictional, fictionalized, or satirical.